Thank you everybody for coming today. We're going to get started with our webinar, Reshaping the Future of Your Power Pricing. Just to get started, just a few minor housekeeping items. So we're going to run the session for about 30 minutes today. We'll have about 15 minutes for questions at the end, so we'll run for a total of about 45 minutes. If you've got any questions, you'll find on the right-hand side on your little GoToWebinar component, you'll have an area to type them in, so you can do that at any time during the session, and we'll do our best to get through as many questions as we can through the webinar. And at the end of this, we'll obviously send out the recording and the slides, so you can pass it around and listen to it later as well. So with me today, I've got myself, obviously, Director and CEO of Flow Power. We've also got David.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And we've got Aidan as well.
Good afternoon, guys.
So today we're going to just talk a little bit about the market, where it's at, discuss a little bit the wholesale market and how it operates and the opportunity that exists there. We'll go into a bit of detail about how PowerActive works. We'll then look at a case study of a customer that's actually taken up the offer and how it works for them. And then we'll discuss next steps and try and get through as many questions as we can. So just very briefly, Flow Power. We're a wholesale electricity retailer. I guess what that means for us is everything that your current retailer does in terms of buying their energy. Our goal is to provide all those same tools that retailer uses through to yourself. So for us, that means access to the spot market, access to financial derivatives and so forth, those sorts of tools. But it also means things like assisting you with demand response, access to large-scale renewables like wind and solar. We do on-site renewables. We've got an engineering team here that integrates very closely with your business to help you take advantage of all those market conditions and so forth. So we're a very different type of electricity retailer in Australia, but that's a brief summary. So we know in the market today that we're in a very much a transition in the electricity market. We've got huge quantities of wind and solar coming online in the coming years. We had Hazelwood shut down a little while ago in Victoria, which dramatically shifted the electricity market in Victoria. We've got all the dramas of South Australia and then going off grid for a period of time. And we also just most recently had the supply constraints in Victoria. So we are going through a very rapidly changing market. And very much the way you buy energy is shifting and sort of needs to shift. We're seeing prices go through the roof and it's become very expensive. So using new technologies, looking at things like batteries and so forth, we believe that there's a real opportunity for consumers to get ahead. And our business is extremely focused on trying to take advantage of that. So to give you a bit more background, I'm going to hand over to David, who's going to talk a little bit about the wholesale market and how that works, just to give you a bit of background as we lead into this new product.
Thanks, Matthew. So electricity, like any other commodity, can be brought wholesale. And by wholesale, Matthew alluded to the same markets that your current and all retailers buy from. And that can be the floating spot market, and it can also be fixed volume, fixed price wholesale energy contracts, which all form the input costs for retailers. So essentially what happens is retailers buy from the wholesale market and they offer their customers a fixed peak and off-peak rate, which most of us are familiar with. And so in that, the retailer then has to factor in a certain amount of risk and a certain amount of shape and profile according to how you use power. So what we've identified as an opportunity there to give customers access to those same markets where they can actually benefit from the wholesale input costs. It also provides a much greater level of flexibility and strategies in which we can optimize their purchasing rather than just sticking to the traditional fixed peak and off peak. So PowerActive is one of those products that allows customers to access those wholesale markets, which is obviously the point of what we're going to cover today.
So that, like the retailers, they're very much about, they've got strategies they use to manage their portfolio. And that management of that portfolio is a huge part of their business, isn't it? It actually is often where they make most of their profits. So one of our goals was to try to find ways to bring those advantages to you without it being overly complicated. Because the wholesale market in its own right can be a bit more involved. But what we've tried to do is identify those key bits to bring forward that give most of the advantage through to yourselves.
Yeah, which is what we're trying to do with the PowerActive product. So
yeah.
So this slide here really demonstrates one of the key problems with the traditional market, in that if we look at the wholesale price for electricity contracts, and this is an example of a calendar year 20 contract for Victoria, a flat contract or a all periods contract, what you can see there is the price of that contract varies considerably depending on when in the market you actually buy it. And this is one of the key issues for customers going out to market is timing. When do I go to market? What is the right time to buy contracts? And you can see that depending on when you actually went to market, you could have paid some 20, 30% more for that contract, or 20%, 30% less for that contract, purely based on the timing. So it's one of the key issues with the current market that we identified.
Yeah, should you go long? Should you go short? What's the answer?
Exactly, you don't know. And I think the truth is that if we knew the answer to that, then potentially we'd be trading electricity.
we might be on a desert island somewhere. Sort
of enjoying hopefully not a desert,
no,
a tropical island, I think.
Tropical island.
The reality is that we don't know, and the reality is it's very hard for anyone to predict what the market will do going forward. But what we do know is that from historically is that it's likely to change. Depending, there's a whole bunch of factors that influence market price, and we're seeing some of those come into play in the market right now that are causing prices to increase. And equally, we've seen those same influences decrease market prices. So the key point is timing is one of the problems for the market. So one of the opportunities we identified is how can we take that risk out of the customer's buying criteria.
And I think, David, if you look at this chart here, this is nothing new to everyone on the line, because this is a current market situation that end users are facing at the moment, that they've seen prices consistently rise. There's been reasons for that, both in the spot market and also potentially coming in the future as well. And so pretty challenging timing to be a procurement manager, or to be making decisions around how long or short to go in such a high priced environment, but a market that continues to rise.
And there's so many competing interests, isn't there? Like Aidan's fairly familiar with what's going on in the market. So even right now, you've got influences that might make you nervous to go long, and in reasons to go short. So, all the large scale renewables coming on, if that all happens and rolls out as it should, that might push price down, but there's other stuff as well that might push it up, isn't there?
Yeah, certainly there is, and we saw no shortage of that through the most recent summer in South Australia and Victoria. So yeah, there are reasons around hydro shortfalls in terms of water, or valuing water at higher levels, higher gas prices that we've seen persistently in the last couple of years, that all add risk, in addition to some of the outages that Matthew spoke about earlier.
Yeah. It might also be worth mentioning that the electricity contract market is like any financial market. It's driven by risk sentiment and outlook for the market. So there's obviously immediately physical factors that affect the market, like whether we're going to have a hot summer, whether we're going to be short of water for generation. All those things impact what the forecast. So again, someone's trying to predict a future price for an electricity period that hasn't yet occurred, based on what that sentiment is. Yeah. So that's why we see the variations in the market price.
Yeah. So if you're trying to enter a contract now, you might be thinking we're at the top of the curve, let's go short because it's going to come down. But 5 years ago in the housing market, you probably would have been saying the same thing, and it just kept going up.
Yeah.
So trying to predict what's going to happen, you can get an idea, you get a bit of a feeling, and I think we do have a bit of a feeling, but it's actually not much more than a feeling. Often there's some logic behind it, but it's hard work, and we don't envy all you purchasers out there trying to make that decision. It's difficult. So
yeah. So the way we see it, you've essentially got two ways in which you can buy. One is, the top line is the traditional method, where you essentially sign a 1 to 3 or potentially more year longer term contract with a traditional retail procurement, which is where you have fixed rates applied to those years, and those could be stepped or they could be flat depending on the offer that you've agreed to. Or an alternative is you can essentially lock in a maximum price, and then if the market falls, you're able to benefit through lower, or the falling of the market, or lower market prices, that should they occur at a point in the future prior to the start of that contract. So in essence, what that means is taking the chart that we saw on the previous slide and saying, well, if we bought at the top of the market, or certainly at a higher price, and the market was to fall prior to that contract actually commencing, then Flow Power would have the ability to lock in that lower price, essentially recontract at the lower rate. And the way in which we do this is through an option. So we essentially purchase the right to buy the electricity contract at a fixed price. That means that no matter what the market does, that price is essentially guaranteed to us. We can execute the price at the maximum. However, if the market falls, we're able to execute that same contract for that same period at a lower price. And that's a fundamental difference to this method of procurement versus the traditional. Under the top line, if the market was to fall, then customers receive no benefit from that. Obviously, they're equally not affected if the market goes up, in the same way that under the Flow Power Power Active model, if contract market was to go up, you're also not affected. Your prices are fixed at the agreed rate.
Yeah. So it's actually, these are some of the tools that are very commonly used in the retail market by retailers to hedge their book and get significantly ahead in terms of their what they're making in the market. So we've tried to. This is not to anyone in the market. This is no surprise we're doing this, but for the consumer, this is a little bit new in terms of how it works. But it's actually not really any more complicated than what they're doing now.
I guess, yeah, exactly. And I guess the key outcome for a customer is timing really doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't really matter when you go to market, because if the market is to fall from when you purchase or when you sign with this product, then you've got the reassurance of knowing that you're able to pick up the lower market price should that occur.
Yep. And it actually takes timing. And under this model, you would never, in theory, go short because you've just got a cap there and you take advantage of those. The reason you go long is because you think the price is low. The reason you don't go long is because you think the price is going to drop. So you don't have that problem anymore.
Exactly right.
So we're going to cover a little bit more detail about how this active option actually works in subsequent slides, but I'm going to hand it over to Matthew now to talk about why we actually developed this product.
So essentially, there's like we said, our goal is to really try to provide the same tools that are there from a large retailer through to yourselves. And this is one of the main tools that is used by the retail market when they're hedging through their strategies. So we really wanted to find a way to bring this into a palatable, easy to understand product, so that we could remove that confusion over what they should do when they come into their contracts and still get the upside of the market that often eventuates. But also, very importantly, protect them against the massive price rises that can occur.
Correct.
So if you think about what happened when Hazelwood went down, prices went through the roof. This product would have protected you enormously well under that scenario over the 2 or 3 years. So the ability to benefit from timing, to get the advantages from the market in terms of what's going on. So
it's also the secondary benefit of this product is allowing customers to take control of how they use power. So we'll talk about this in more detail, but customers aren't required to do anything different than they do today.
No, they still essentially get a peak off-peak rate.
Yep.
As they are now, they know what those peak off-peak rates will be. The only difference is that as time goes on, they may come down. Essentially, is what could happen.
We're going to show a few examples, or talk about a few examples of how that has and can occur for customers. But it does provide a unique opportunity where you may have some fixed pricing locked in, but you can actually have the opportunity to improve that if you wanted to do potentially some optimization of how you use power. And these may be very incremental and, for most customers, insignificant changes to how they operate.
Yeah, so that's actually a key point. You'll find that there are a few additional items to our contract, and one of those is to really try to essentially empower the consumer that if they do something like install solar on their property, or as battery technology comes down in price,
it should benefit them.
You'd be able to put it in. Now, under a traditional fixed rate contract, if you took those steps and were proactive and actually took the steps of putting in a battery or putting in rooftop solar, it actually makes it cheaper to buy power from the wholesale market, because your profile will improve. But under fixed contracts, you wouldn't see that benefit. Your energy rate would stay what you contracted at. Yeah. Under the Power Active model, if you take those steps to become more efficient, then things get better. Your price will actually come down. Your physical rate that is billed under a contract will actually be reduced.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very important distinction, is that not only do we give you the upside of the market in our Power Active product through a lowering market, we also give you back all the benefit that might come from you taking steps to improve how you use your power. You don't actually have to do that, but as technology changes, you probably will. And there'll probably be a cost-benefit analysis done at some point saying, should I buy that battery? Well, under our model, if you do that, you'll get 100% of the benefit instead of retail. So it's a very important distinction. So that's introduced through what we call our price efficiency factor, which is essentially how price efficient you are.
Yeah, it's covered in subsequent slides as well. So
yeah.
So just to simply explain how the Power Active product works, it's a fairly simple equation.
Yep.
So the rate that appears on a customer's contract every month is effectively what we call the contracted or the initial rate, and that's a rate sourced from the wholesale market. So for those of you that are familiar with the energy market, the ASX is probably the most prevalent place to find those future dated energy contract prices or wholesale contract prices, multiplied by the price efficiency factor, which we'll cover in subsequent slides, which is really a measure of how you use power. And then there's obviously an agreed margin applied to that. So it's a pretty straightforward method in which we apply that rate.
It's also very transparent, isn't it? Because the actual rate will, at the time you sign up, will come from that ASX Energy.
That's right. Yeah. So there's quite a lot of visibility to that.
Yeah.
And in terms of sort of a standard or a fixed rate price that customers may be familiar with, the bones of it is very similar to this that we're offering. You just simply don't have the transparency around what that price efficiency factor is or the retail markup, and that's what this product allows for before we even consider the active option and the improvements that the PEF may bring.
Yeah, good point. And for those out there that are going to be negotiating with us to negotiating price, just remember our bit's the retail markup. The ASX price is what it is. We pass that straight through. And we try to be as competitive as we can, obviously, in the retail market, but that's when you're negotiating with us, that's essentially what you're negotiating, is trying to reduce that retail markup with us.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more, expand on this idea of the active option, or what we've referred to as keeping the options open there. This again shows this time a New South Wales calendar-based contract for 2019, and it just demonstrates the falls in the market. So you can see there that we had a 16% fall from the period of Jan to May in that same contract. Now, this is a period of prior to this contract starting, obviously at 1 Jan this year, and then subsequently had a 45% increase in that contract price. So again, it illustrates the point, depending on when you signed, the price you actually paid for that contract could have varied considerably. So the active option would allow the customer to effectively lock in a price at any time, but should the market decrease, then Flow Power is able to execute the option and secure execute the right to buy the contract at a lower price. And that's effectively what we're trying to do there, is take the decision or the timing decision out of the equation and give customers comfort in saying, well, it really doesn't matter when I sign, because if the market falls, then I know that I can access that through Flow Power's Power Active product.
Yep.
So a further illustration of this, if we take the example of a traditional fixed rate again on the top line of the 1, 2, and 3 years, and then the bottom line, the Power Active product, generally speaking, the first year may be fixed. And the reason for that is the option has a expiry that's 6 weeks prior to the start of that contract. So the option is valid until 6 weeks prior to the commencement of that particular period. So for any contracting that's occurring close to that period, then the option may have limited value. So the further out you are in time, i.e. the longer dated contracts, the more value the option will have, the more time the market has to move up and down, the more likely you are to extract value from it. So as a general principle, you can apply the option or the active option to any period, but as a general rule, we find that the most value is extracted from periods that are sort of 12 to 18 or 24 months out from when they actually start. And that's when the years, particularly 2 and 3, will generally have the most value. So you can see there, the blue simply shows the maximum value the dotted line on the blue shows the maximum value that would have been locked in under those rates that cannot be exceeded. And the orange shows where the rate was actually able to get down to under the market fall. So by Flow Power capturing those market falls. Now, Aidan's going to talk through a really good case study of how this works, which illustrates this really well. But essentially, the active option does add a small premium to the rate. So that premium is actually an optional premium that can be added to engage this product. But considering that the small premium that's added is often many times outweighed by the significant gain in the market fall, it's a pretty good strategy in terms of accessing
or the potential gain.
Potential gain, that's true. So
yeah, because obviously we've been optimistic with our current view here, where it falls and falls, but it won't always do that. In some years, it'll go through the roof, and you'll be capped roughly where you would have been had you signed a fixed contract. So it's a small compromise you're making, you might say.
Yeah.
To get access to, as we demonstrated, 20% variations in the forward market that can occur. And right now, where we are, relatively historically highs with so much uncertainty going forward, the potential for large variations in prices is reasonable.
Particularly when you consider the second and third year with all the water to go under the bridge on those contracts before delivery. That's
right. Yeah, there's an awful lot going to change in the market over the coming years, isn't there?
So the second part of the Power Active product is, as mentioned previously, is a thing called the price efficiency factor, or PEF as we abbreviate it. The price efficiency factor is simply a measure of how a customer uses power relative to the market average. And we've created a way of providing this through measuring the load-weighted price of a customer's load versus the time-weighted average market price. And that's something that a customer can, or their advisor can calculate very easily. It's a transparent method of shaping a contract according to how a customer uses their energy. So in the same way that when you go to a retailer, they'll take a wholesale price and they'll effectively apply a shaping premium to it based on how your load is relative to the market, or their particular hedging strategy. So not surprisingly, a customer that generally uses more power at particularly a more expensive time of the year and a more expensive part of the day should in theory pay more than a customer who uses less power at those times and more in low cost times. And I'll show some examples of that in the next slide. So again, this is a really easy, simple way of adjusting a wholesale price to a customer's load. And it's a transparent, disclosed method which customers can easily calculate or determine themselves. We do provide this price efficiency factor where we have data to our customers in advance, so they have a good idea of what we'd expect that to be, so they can work with what is the expected price efficiency factor on a quarterly, monthly, or yearly basis to work out what their rates look like.
And it's always very predictable in terms of, once we've got the data, we know what your PEF is.
Yep.
You'll be able to see it. So it doesn't really add uncertainty to it. In my view, what we're doing here is adding opportunity to it.
Yeah,
it's very much the way we'd look at it.
That's a very good point. So the bottom point there on the slide talks about the opportunity to improve the PEF. Aidan will provide a case study example in our case study of this, but suffice to say that small changes in the way in which a customer uses their energy over the course of their day or period of time, quarterly or annually, can have fairly profound impacts on their PEF, which obviously can reduce their rate.
And that could be through physical changes, couldn't it? Or it could be through equipment changes.
On-site generation or energy efficiency, batteries, load shifting. So we've got some examples of that to come.
Yeah.
So I'm now going to run through three really simple illustrations of this PEF to explain the concept. So if you're a customer or you have a load consumption profile that's effectively flat, i.e. you use power, pretty much the same level of power most of the day, for the entire period of the day, I should say, then you would have a PEF of 1 effectively because you are at the market average, versus a customer who uses more of their power at low cost times. So the blue line there is representing the average market price. The orange is representing the customer's load. So you can see on that the top line there, that customer is using more power generally during less expensive parts of the day, and the reverse. So they have a PEF that's less than 1, which means they would in effect get a price that's actually slightly below the wholesale price, which is a great outcome.
We call them price efficient.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good
good way to look at it.
Yeah. So then the bottom one is then a customer who uses more power during expensive parts of the day. So that would have a price efficiency factor of greater than 1, which would mean they would have a price slightly higher than the wholesale price. So there's some examples, and you can obviously ascertain from that how you might go about reducing or improving that PEF through potentially shifting a bit of load around. And again, there's some really good examples of which we've been able to implement with our customers, where they've been able to improve that PEF over time and reduce their overall rate.
It's quite transformational in terms of this product, because although you'll end up with a peak and off-peak rate, essentially from the ASX prices under the Poweractive, to be more efficient, it's not about shifting load from peak and off-peak. It's about trying to improve your price efficiency factor.
Potentially really granular incremental changes,
Yeah.
which may have very little effect. So peak and off-peak is a really good point, Matthew. Peak and off-peak is what we call a very blunt instrument in terms of encouraging customers to change behaviour. The market doesn't actually operate necessarily that way. The market has much more granular pricing throughout the day in terms of half-hourly or hourly kind of individual points at which can be optimized, and that's really where this price efficiency factor has enormous opportunities for customers. And look, I'm not aware of any other retail contract that provides benefit for customers to say, you know, over the period of the time, and you get it rewarded for it. So it's a really cool opportunity in that respect. So
I think that hammers home the point. Other retailers are making an assumption about how customers will consume and not providing any of that benefit in the event that you do load shift or any of those other methods that you talked about. And that assumption often holds for 1, 2, or 3 years, whereas in this transparent process, those improvements are passed through right away.
Yeah, that's right. So essentially what we're saying here is that, you know, if good or bad, whatever your price efficiency is, your current retailer is already doing some form of measurement like this.
Correct.
And charging you for it.
Exactly right.
And if you change your behaviour or become more price efficient, they won't come back and say, oh, you're now cheaper to service, so we'll give you some money back.
Yeah.
It's not how it works.
No.
But under our model, you've got that full advantage. So it might be just, you know, you might not do anything for a year with this type of advantage, but the advantage is there. So in a year's time, when you're going to go upgrade that piece of equipment, you can now consider energy as part of that decision process.
Yeah, and what we find, I think it's fair to say, is that the changes that we're talking about are often minor and really unimpactful in the customer's operation. So when presented with the evidence, what we find is a lot of customers will look at it very seriously, considering the savings that are available through it. It often doesn't have any operational, financial, or very minimal financial impact. And again, if that's being significantly outweighed by the financial gain through reducing their energy costs, then it just makes good business sense.
Yeah.
And it's also supporting the market. It's creating a more efficient market where customers are connected or tuned into the market pricing generation.
That's actually a really good point to raise, because, you know, actually what you're doing here, and from a ultra-realistic point of view, you're actually doing exactly the right thing for the market as well. So for anyone that does decide to take advantage of the PF and become more price efficient, you're actually helping fixing the reliability of the market as well.
Yep.
So it's actually a responsible thing to do. But I would recommend you do it for the savings, really. But
yeah, of course. I guess, and the final kind of cap on that is that you don't actually have to do anything different than you are today. We're not asking, or it's not a requirement of any customer to change any behaviour whatsoever.
Yep.
Under Poweractive. It's simply sitting there as an opportunity should you want to do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to now hand it. Oh, sorry, Aidan.
David, let's jump in and see any working example of a customer on Poweractive in Victoria over the last 12 months or so. So, like many end users approaching the end of a current contract, we had a customer in Victoria approach us in early 2018, thinking about how to manage their uncontracted position, thinking about potentially a 3-year deal starting in 19, so the middle of 2018 and out 3 years, faced with the usual sort of retail products in terms of fixing that 3-year period, going long, going short. It obviously doesn't have to be 3 years. In the event that the customer took a view that prices were high and that they may potentially fall, they could have taken a short-term fixed deal, or they could have taken the view that prices had further upside to them or further risk of rising and could have taken a long deal. But the customer actually came to us and decided to take a look at the Poweractive product and similar to how David's diagram looked at it earlier, that was around the 3 years with the first year fixed and the second and third year with the active option. And you can see that that happened all in early 2018. So the contract signing happened just beyond the peak of summer. So I think we were into the start of March when that occurred, with the 3 years locked in, but with the active option on the second and third years, and that contract obviously starting from 1 July 2018. As we approached the start of year one, prices already started to fall. You may remember from either the previous chart or from your individual following of the market that prices did soften towards the middle of last year before they went on the fairly sustained bull run that we experience at the moment. And so the declines in the market actually allowed this customer to benefit from those falls for the second and third years. And so if we pop through to the next slide, we can see how significant those improvements were. The market actually fell between point of contract to the middle of the year, about 14% on the second year contract, which was FIN 21. All of that happened over the space of a few months. Had the customer moved or chosen a fixed price alternative, the rates that they would have secured in March or April would have been those rates. They would have been locked in. But under the active option for the small premium that they parted with, we were able to lock them in at a lower rate about the middle of 2018, so not too far into the start of the first year. And so that timing risk was taken out of their hands. Given markets tend to sort of all rally together, all fall together, not surprisingly, the third year contract had also come off at that stage and allowed us to secure the third year, the FIN 21, at the similar time. And so that had fallen by about 13%. Longer term contracts perhaps not quite as liquid, and so didn't quite fall quite as sharply as the FIN 20, but still enough to offset the premium of that active option in the third year and the second year, and lock in an improved lower rate. And you can see there in the top right there, actual rates that customer has been able to secure on a flat basis. We do split those out into peak and off peak, but essentially you can see those improvements there.
And they also have the year 4 and beyond as well, don't we? So ideally we would be recommending at the completion of that first year to probably take out the next option.
Yeah, we certainly see it as a potential rolling contract because of that elimination or near elimination of timing risk. There is really no improvement to waiting.
No.
You may as well take the plus 1 year in terms of the active option and just allow the market to run out. And any improvements, any falls, will lock you in at the lower rate. But if the market does continue to rally, you're obviously capped out by having that active option in place.
I know we don't have the analysis with us now, but I know when we've done sort of like a 10-year rolling analysis of that type of behaviour where you go through each year you extend your option continually through the market, you get significantly ahead of spot, you get significantly ahead of contract. I don't know the number, it's something we'll have to do some more work on, but it's significant. It's definitely a very logical way to purchase.
Yeah, rather than sort of put the retail contract in the bottom drawer and wait for it to come up 6 weeks before expiry, dust it off, and then call it the retailers. Let the active option protect you and sit there and do the work for you.
Yeah, in theory, it's when you switch to this model, you sort of ideally you stay on it because it does have a lot of advantages, and one of those advantages is just removing that timing risk. So you just generally purchase as far out as you can. It's hard to get options in 4 years out, but 3 years is quite reasonable.
Yeah, exactly right. For this particular customer, this is a scenario that they are facing today. In the event that they did choose to put behind the meter solar or on-site solar, that would likely drive an improvement in the price efficiency factor. You guys spoke earlier about how that is calculated. But if you think about how prices, the spot prices are set today, and typically daytime prices are a bit higher with sort of an afternoon, evening peak and obviously the morning peak. But by and large, daytime prices are higher than nighttime prices. And so the synergies there with on-site solar, which reduce consumption during those daytimes, essentially during those high price periods, would actually see this customer improve their PEF indicatively there by 7.7%, and that gets washed through the calculation as you saw in the mathematics earlier, and so that would be another way for this customer in future into year 2, if they make the decision that they do want to put behind the meter solar on, that they could continue to improve their price in addition to any of the savings or the benefits that having the active option has already brought.
So it's a bit like, and maybe an analogy for that, Aidan, is a bit like saying, well, you get rewarded for putting solar on by getting a slightly cheaper market price. So for the energy that's coming from the market or from your retailer, rather than the stuff that's being supplied by the on-site solar, you're actually being rewarded by a lower PEF, which means your actual market rate's actually improved.
As well as, isn't it? Like,
yeah, in addition to the savings.
Lower consumption.
Yeah. So it's a pretty unique kind of outcome, which is...
Interestingly, this particular benefit that exists in the market for all those putting rooftop solar on is going to the retailer right now.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the benefits that retailers are seeing. And I think, well, I actually can't say this. I'm sure the audience can probably talk to this more, but if you've got solar on, I wonder how retailers are actually quoting fixed rate contracts. I wonder if they're reflecting that competitive advantage that you're bringing to the market, or whether you're actually having to pay a premium because the usage has dropped.
Yeah, the benefit of the shape should be passed through to customers, but
yeah. But it may be a case that the retailers look at it from the point of view, well, you're now less load to me, you're less worthwhile, so less value, so it might not reflect that.
Yeah, and the challenge under a fixed price contract is that the shape risk and the margins are all bundled, so you don't have transparency around that, whereas this unpacks all of those components and you can see transparently where your costs are coming from.
Yeah.
The final slide we've got is really just around extending and rolling that strategy, which we'd certainly encourage customers to do, particularly because of that active option benefit there.
Yeah, which is what I was talking about before. I probably jumped ahead of you a little bit, didn't I?
You're allowed to do that, Matthew.
Yeah, so that rolling aspect is a very powerful aspect to it as well, in that you just keep this process going. So, when they suddenly bring forward the Liddell shutdown or something and the market prices spike through the roof, you're protected.
Yeah.
That type of idea, or some major project doesn't get off the ground, or there's something unexpected in the market.
Or the Greens find themselves in a balance of power after the federal election and
go for 100%
shifts.
renewable.
Exactly right. All of those things can be accommodated.
Have a dramatic
impact. That uncertainty can be accommodated with the active option.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not able to predict what's going to happen in that sense. But there are those sorts of things that can happen and have happened throughout the history of the market.
Absolutely.
And they'll continue to happen. You would probably argue that the likelihood of it happening right now in terms of the coming years is probably higher than 5-10 years ago.
Exactly right. And I think to hammer home that point, I certainly don't envy anyone out there trying to make decisions for your business at the moment, given prices are trending higher, but around all-time highs. Pretty tough decisions to be making.
All right. Well, thank you, Aidan and David. We've actually gone a little bit over, but we've still got some time for questions. So we'll start to have a look at these questions now. So let's have a look. So someone's asked a question: is there a risk with buying wholesale? Is what they've asked. Now, I'll let I'm going to have David answer, but I'll start off by just saying briefly, this is not really a wholesale product as such, really, is it? It's closer to it.
It looks like something that most people are familiar with, which is the sort of typical peak and off-peak offers that are out there in the market. Obviously, it's referenced to a wholesale price, so that's the transparent part of it. So we can show clearly where the price is derived from, and customers can jump on the ASX Energy website and very, very easily see where that price comes from. But I think the question was, is there risk in buying wholesale?
Yeah.
Well, I'd say there's no more risk in buying wholesale than signing to a retail contract that may be at the peak of the market.
Interestingly, it's one of the things I often have said is you are all already buying wholesale, because you essentially are going up and down with the price of the wholesale market over the long term.
Yeah.
So
your retail contracts are influenced entirely by the wholesale market. If you understand that the input costs for retailers are those wholesale prices, once you understand that, then it kind of helps to manage that expectation around what the risks are.
Yeah.
And obviously, our job is entirely about helping customers access that.
Yeah. So someone's asked, what's the maximum term for Poweractive? Abe?
Yeah, like Matthew said before, 3 to 4 years is the sort of what's available out there in the market. But we're certainly happy to look at it on a case-by-case basis. If some businesses do want to look longer term, we'll see if we can
try and accommodate it.
Exactly right. Yep. Exactly right. The liquidity in the futures or the options market does go out about 3 years.
Someone's asked if this is the same as an ARO, which is an average rate option.
Slightly different. So a slightly different option sits behind this from a mechanical perspective. Essentially, it's a call option on a swap or a futures product.
But the average rate option is about capping the average price of the spot market. In this particular product, the spot market is really not considered in the billing process, other than through the PDF calculation. So,
for those that are interested, sitting behind this product is essentially a swaption,
yes,
as the market knows it. But for the consumer, it just very much is a standard contract, a load following contract. It's not a volume based contract. It's a load following contract.
And I think that dovetails really nicely into the next question there around, is this considered a financial derivative?
Yeah.
No, is the short answer.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. It isn't a derivative, or it isn't a derivative product.
Or a contract. It's not a contract for difference, essentially.
Yeah. So no, there's no requirement to enter into any financial contracts.
Someone's asked whether the PV may make, so on-site solar may make the PEF worse, and that is a possibility as the market develops and more solar penetration comes in.
So-called duck curve risk.
Yep, it's definitely feasible. You'll find that the market will evolve and new technologies will come in into the market. So things like battery, things like peaking generation and so forth. So they'll all come in and play a role. And our goal will be, as these new things come into the market, to make it as easy as possible for you guys, for the consumers, to access those new technologies as they happen.
Yep.
So that's where you seriously look at batteries, whether it be on-site or off-site.
Well, even your load shifting on load optimization could become quite a compelling case to look at how you shift the load around based on that, if that was to occur in any significant format.
Someone's asked, can you contract part of your load to Poweractive? And at the moment, with the design of the product, my understanding is no. So it would be all the load through the NEMI. Now, for the larger customers, probably what I'd say is this is one of our products. So if you want to have a partial requirement, or you've got partial options there, we can discuss those with you and come up with a custom solution.
Certainly, but ultimately, we take the load from one NIMI.
Yep.
If you're a multi-site customer and have multi NIMIs, certainly you can contract some or one of those on Poweractive.
Yeah. Someone asked, what if I can't change my operations?
As previously discussed, you don't actually need to do anything different than you are today. So we're not advocating that this requires any physical change to the way in which a customer uses their energy, simply that there is an opportunity for them to improve their outcomes if they wanted to do so. And I guess, having been involved in physical response to the market for a number of years, what we can say is we do know that most customers are able to do something, even if it's quite small, and those small things can often have quite a big impact. So it's just something that's there available that we would encourage customers to look at and make a decision around whether or not they wanted to.
Yeah. Okay. If the price falls, do I pay the active option premium?
Great question. Certainly, if you think about it from the sort of back office perspective, that option is now considered out of the money, because the price has fallen and it's no longer capping your price. But as we said earlier, given we're risk managing it in the background and have likely purchased derivatives to cover those exposure, that premium is still payable for any of the active option periods.
Yep. I think we've got a question here from a consultant asking if they can send us requests for quote as per a standard tender type arrangement, and we would welcome anything that comes through from consultants out there wanting to have a look at the product. We can help you through it. It's obviously a little bit different, so it's not a straight you know, they've got 8 cents, we've got 8.1 or anything like that. There's a bit more in it because you've got to account for that active option advantage, which is the main thrust of the product. So
if you can help, what is very helpful, if we can supply some 12 months of interval data, would allow us just to provide some preliminary numbers around the outcomes that we expect that customer to achieve. So
yeah, but for any consultants that want to engage, we can help them through that process about how to best understand and analyse the outcomes of the product, without a doubt.
I think just on that point there, Matthew, is the product's actually suitable for anyone. There's no specific requirements. Our particular segment of customer is the C&I, or the commercial industrial market. So anyone that theoretically meets that threshold we're able to provide an offer for PowerActive to those customers. So the product's suitable for everyone.
Yeah, we're almost out of time. We've still got a few more questions to go. We'll try and get one or two more in. Someone's asked, if I increase or decrease load, how does it affect the rate I pay? Which is interesting, because so if we increase or decrease load, what's it do with the PowerActive?
So in the same way that you would have a normal with a traditional retail contract, if you reduce the amount of consumption in peak or off-peak time, you would simply pay less than you would have, because your cents per kilowatt hour effectively should remain the same, and the outcome would be that you've simply consumed less kilowatt hours in that period, therefore your cost for that period is lower. The only perhaps caveat to that is that if the way in which you consume power changes, so if you were to consume power differently, less, and in a different way, then you might have potentially a change to the price efficiency factor.
That's right.
But if you're using power in exactly the same way, but you're simply using less of it, the only change would be as a reduction in cost through the less kilowatt hours that you've used.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I think that's good. All right. Well, thanks, David and Aidan. I think we've run a little bit 5 minutes over, but hopefully what we've covered today has been helpful to you all, and I thank you for all taking the time to listen and try and understand the product. So if you do have any questions that we didn't get to, we'll come back to you individually. In the meantime, give us a call and we can try and answer any other questions or help you out. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.